Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome again to the CCB's Share and Connect QCTR event, previously known as the CCB QCTR, but we thought it was good to change the name a little bit because in the future we are aiming to set up more webinars that will not only be QCTRs, but also more webinars in general. Once again, we are welcoming more than 800 people from all over the world. And the guest speakers for today are Miguel de Bruiker, the managing director of the CCB, followed by Kevin Holwood, who will discuss with you the last quarter cyber event discussed by Kevin. And then we have also a presentation brought by Bart Asnot from IBM. And finally, we have Tom Hegel from SentinelOne, who will take us or will discuss with us what he expects in the coming months. Just a few simple, let's say, guidelines during this event. As you see, we have a chat room. The chat room is, let's say, the less official part of it. This is the place where you can say hi and discuss and make jokes with your colleagues. If you have a question, then it's important that you post the question in the question room. Questions who are posted in the chat room will not be answered because it's just too difficult for the moderators to follow the stream of messages in the chat room. So if you have a question, please post it in the question room. One of the moderators will answer the question, or if it's a question for the guest speaker, then we will bring the question to the stage. And last but not least, we also have a poll room. In that room, we will ask for your opinion, which is very important for us to hear more and to get feedback from you. We hope to end this event around 3:45 this afternoon, Belgium time, of course. And then now, first guest speaker is Miguel de Bruiker, the managing director of the CCB. Miguel, would you like to join me on stage, please?
Good afternoon. Can you hear me, Pedro?
I can hear you. I can hear you very well. But once again, we thought I disabled the the bleeping sound, but once again it's on, so I would like to ask people not to use the emoticons at the moment, and I will make it I will do necessary things to disable those emoticons. Okay, Miguel, the stage is yours.
Okay, thank you. To be honest, I don't immediately see where I can disable those emoticons, so my apologies for that. Okay, very shortly, and I hope you can now see my very short presentation. Actually, it's only one slide, and the question that we recently asked ourselves is, if you have geopolitical tensions and you have an escalation that is going up, where is cyber in that whole story? So one of our ideas was that everything starts up with normal diplomacy, where you exchange ideas and you discuss and you try to find consensus on solutions where everybody is more or less happy about. The next stage is espionage. Disinformation is then when you're going up. That is in influence operations, for instance. Then you have economic measures. Then the next level is already sabotage. That can be physical, but that can also be already into the domain, for instance, of cyber. Let's think about disruptive attacks like DDoS, or even cable cutting, or intervening in data centers, stuff like that. So the next level is then, of course, cyber. Then you have kinetic and...
Sorry, Miguel, 1 second, please. To disable the sound, because it's coming from your computer, in the chat room, you can turn off the notifications, because every time when somebody logs in, we get that notification sound, and you can disable it in the chat room on the upper right side.
I think I got it, Pedro.
Thank you very much, Miguel. Thank you.
Is that better?
I don't hear anything anymore, so apparently it's okay now.
Thank you for guiding me to that button. Okay, so and the last level is nuclear. Normally, as I said, differences and different opinions you discuss on a diplomatic way. When tensions go up, you see that the espionage disinformation is going up, and then you come into the zone of conflict. And when somewhere, according to us, the line between being in conflict and already being able to talk about war is probably is going to be an escalation path, um, somewhere in the cyber zone, in the sense that a lot of cyber attacks are absolutely not acts of war. They can be part of a conflict, tensions, but also part of a conflict. But they are dangerous to use in the sense that, for instance, for NATO, Article 5 can be invoked, an armed attack, even from a cyber attack. So this is something that you must be very careful about. And it is quite probable or possible that in future conflicts, we will see that it is the first acts of war that are considered as an act of war might be cyber attacks. So this is why we draw that line through cyber. And I just wanted to give you that reflection on why is cyber so important, maybe why in the current conflict don't we see a lot of actions in the current conflict. Let me be careful about what I say. That is, they might be at a certain point of time considered as an armed attack, um, and that is at that point of time it might become a thin line between being involved in a conflict or not, or even changing from conflict to the terminology of war. So that was a little bit what I wanted to give you as a small introduction. I hope you find it interesting this afternoon. And I give the floor back to Pedro. Thank you.
Short, but powerful, and with a good insight. So thank you for that, Miguel. Next guest speaker for this afternoon. Well, guest speaker. I think that Kevin has always been around when it became to the QCTR. Next one is Kevin Holvoet. Kevin, can you join me on stage, please?
Hello, good afternoon.
Hi, Kevin. What are you bringing for us today?
Well, I'm trying to bring an overview of what we saw cyber threat-wise, kind of the cyber threat landscape, what we saw in the first quarter of 2022, what we may expect in the future, and also a little bit of things that we have seen in the last month, as we are already 1 month in Q2 already. So I'll go a little bit over that.
Okay, you know the drill. Stage is yours.
Thank you. So, hello everyone. It's nice to see that many people again. Let me share my screen. There you go. Okay. Everybody ready? Let's see how fast this chat is working. Oh yeah, people are ready. Awesome. Okay, so for the people who don't know me, I'm Kevin Holvoet. I'm the lead of the Threat Research Center, which is a team within the Citrus department of the CCB. So we all do cyber threat intelligence, and we try to find out what's going on in the world and what would be the biggest threat to Belgium, but also to certain sectors. You can reach me if you look here on the right at DJHash on Twitter. Kevin Holvoet is my name on LinkedIn, and my email address is also there on the right side. The topics we'll discuss today is threats to Belgium. That's the first one. We are still the Center for Cybersecurity Belgium, right? Even for an international event. Then we'll go into the global threats to critical sectors that we have seen, some key APT actor trends, key exploited vulnerabilities, and the outlook or a possible outlook for the future. Now, what were a couple of threats that we've seen to Belgium? Mostly ransomware attacks, right? So we've identified, or at least 17 people notified us, 17 companies notified us of ransomware attacks, where Conti and Lockbit 2.0 were the most prevalent actors, or at least the ransomware that was most used. Some other ransomware that we've seen was QLocker, VG or VFGJ. Come on, guys, choose your names. Krylock, Avos Locker, and there were a couple of other very, very little ones. Now, there is always some malware that is deployed, or in many cases, there's a certain malware that is deployed that we call droppers. These things are actually spread around all over the world, sometimes to very targeted spear phishing attacks, but sometimes also just spreading it to as many companies, as many systems as possible, and then using that to drop their own ransomware and deploy it inside the system. Some of these examples that are very prevalent in the last quarter that were very active there are Iced ID, Emotet. They're around again since end of last year. We have TrickBot that became active again, Bazaar Loader, and QuackBot. Now, Cobalt Strike is a ransomware that is used in, or not a ransomware, sorry, is a malware that is used in a lot of cases, publicly identified, but also some other things. The initial access vectors that we have seen mostly were phishing, but also exploited vulnerabilities towards VPN connections, Citrix kind of things. So any entry point to your network, leaked credentials. So if you can monitor the dark web or anything else for any leaked credentials for your company, that might be interesting, and you might check it out if people are using the same kind of passwords for their internal accounts. And then also insider threats. I don't know if people remember Lapsus. Most of them have apparently been arrested already, but these guys try to really go to people, to employees of you, pay them, or in some other way persuade them in working together with them and giving them access to your company. The CCB has also prevented 5 ransomware incidents in 2022. So how do we do this? We get information from trusted partners. Thank you, by the way, for this. And with this information, we try to identify the company that is probably going to be attacked, or is at least having an active connection to a C2 server. We identify it, we inform them, and try to help them as much as possible with the possible ransomware attack. The ransomware incidents have, in general, also decreased. Now, they decreased in Q1, and we think that the Ukrainian-Russian war has something to do with it. Of course, we can never be sure, but if you look at what kind of activity has happened on the dark web and in the criminal underground, you see that most of those criminal groups, especially the Russian ones, are very motivated to target Ukraine, to look at what they can do against Ukraine, or the other way around, against Russia, and are not focusing themselves anymore on other companies. This will probably change in the future, but more on that later. Some other threats were Android banking Trojans. A big one, FreeBot. This one was very, very active in Belgium. A new one that is popping up is called Xenomorph. We've also seen some of them, or a couple of infections here in Belgium, where a couple of banks are actually targeted to steal money from their customers. So we need to be aware of these. The CCB also works together with ISPs in Belgium to try and fight as much as possible the FluBot campaigns, and in the future, probably other campaigns. Now, the last big threat to Belgian companies, but also more in general, is the sale of network access to Belgian organizations. So on the dark web, on the underground, we see that a lot of credentials are stolen. We see that a lot of these credentials are leaked, but not only credentials, also just plain access, right? Hey, I'm selling access to that one. Now I have an active connection running. There's an active beacon coming out from a malware that I put there. You can access it with my platform. You can access it with my system. And they just sell that for a couple hundred, couple thousand, depending on the victim. These things can be sold not only for ransomware actors, as we've seen a lot in the past, but they can also be sold to state-sponsored actors. Never forget about those, right? What do we try to do as a CCB, as CCB Citrus? We try to monitor mentions of Belgian organizations, Belgian domains inside all of those fora, all of the underground chat systems, and so on and so on. And if we can identify a company behind one of these things, we send a spear warning again to tell them about their compromise, to tell them about the possible network access. And then, well, it is up to you, of course, to make sure that you do your incident response, that you do your work, and that you clean up everything. Now, what are the global threats to critical sectors? The sectors that we identified that were targeted the most in the last quarter, in Q1 of 2022, were mostly government, healthcare, finance, and energy sector. But there were a couple of cases towards defense, transportation, and insurance companies too, although a lot less. That's why they are in between brackets. Now, there's one big or couple of big espionage campaigns. One of them is, for example, TA 445, which is also linked to UNC Mandiant's group 1151, and they seem to use phishing attacks to get access to companies, to get access to organizations, and to then steal information from them. Another one is that European governments all over the place, so not only EU government, but European governments in general from European countries, their personnel specifically is being targeted to steal information regarding, anything related to the Ukrainian war, but mostly the movements of refugees from Ukraine, and any other issues that are aligned with the Russian interests. So we do expect that these espionage campaigns, these specific ones, are coming from Russia, but they have not been attributed yet. Another case is where Fin7 is using a bad USB attack called LilyGo on the USB device to target defense, transportation, and insurance industry, the ones in between brackets. And they actually do this, so they send the USBs, the bad USB devices, and they send them in either something that is COVID-19 related, but also a lot of Amazon gift boxes. So really nicely packaged, a really interesting package. You get it and you're like, oh, a little surprise from Amazon. I really want to get this one. You open it, you get a USB, and you're infected. And a lot of companies, people use a laptop for their own personal use too, and your company is infected by Fin7, a big and very active criminal group. And the next one is the Brata banking Trojan. The Brata banking Trojan is a Trojan, like a bit like Flubot, but a little bit different, that we have seen in other countries around the world, but it seems to be coming to Europe too. So if you're a European company or a European citizen, it might be interesting to also look into that one and to make sure that you have some kind of antivirus installed on your Android device to protect against the Brata banking Trojan. At the moment, we see activity going against UK, Poland, and Italy, but this might increase, of course. I see in chat that somebody gets a free bike every day. Well, good for you, but I hope you don't click these things, right? So we have these Brata banking Trojans are spread through SMS and messages, but also through things like WhatsApp and maybe in the future through other chat systems that people are using. Now we have the Medusa banking Trojan. Now what's special about the Medusa banking Trojan? It shares certain names, it shares certain package names with the Flubot banking Trojan, and also it uses the same smishing infrastructure to actually spread the malware. So they're actually using infected devices, bots that were infected with Flubot, to then send SMSs with another message with a different link to spread the Medusa banking Trojan. So we at the moment are not sure, I mean, research will probably tell us later on, are not sure if the Medusa banking Trojan is spread by the same theme behind Flubot, or if Flubot is kind of renting their infrastructure out to others. That's not clear at the moment, but maybe we'll find some evidence later on. And then there is or was a big cyber espionage campaign targeting specifically the renewable energy sector. So anyone that was dabbling in energy, in renewable energy, solar panels, or anything else that is related to it, this is research and development, but this is also the creation and production of certain products and things like that. So any company related to renewable energy or environment protection or even financing that sector is a possible target for this Connie group, which seems to be linked to North Korea as far as we see, but for some reason has some links with APT28. If you want to read more about that, there is a public report that you can definitely find if you type in cyber espionage campaign targeting renewable energy sector. What they do is they steal login credentials with a spear phishing campaign. Now, here's something I want to say on the global threats. Don't mention the war. What do I mean with this? We've seen that certain companies have come out and said something about the war in Ukraine, said something against Russia or pro-Russia or anything like that. You know, your higher management, your C-level publicly speaks about this, or they say, well, we will not stop our operations in Russia. We will continue this. We will continue investments and so on and so on. And some hacktivist groups and some criminal groups are not agreeing with you, right? They don't agree with what you say, with what you spoke about, and they just target you. They're looking into, they're trying to get some access, they're trying to steal some data, and then publishing it on something, for example, like DDoS Secrets, a published website, very similar to what WikiLeaks is, but mostly used now for all the Russian and other data. There is an interesting site here. If you look over this one, it's from the Yale University. So what did they do? They actually did some research and they tried to curate which companies are doing what, and they divided them in 7 levels, where the highest level is where you really cooperate with the Russian part, where you really still invest in your Russian part of your company and so on. But it might be that you decided not to do anything with Russia, to stop your operations, to really go away from Russia, things like that. And you will still be in the list, but it's probable that if you are on top of the list, that you will be targeted by Anonymous, for example. One of the examples was Nestle. So Nestle has been targeted by one of the Anonymous groups, one of the subgroups of Anonymous, and their data was stolen and released to the public. So beware, if you are on this list, know that there is a possible threat towards you. And if you're an intel analyst for your company, make sure that you are aware what your company is publicly saying about the company and what their mission is, what their objectives are. All right, this can definitely change your threat landscape. This can definitely change the threat towards you with this Ukrainian war, with all the conflicts that are going on in the world. Now, what are some key APT actor trends? Well, of course, we have to look at the groups that are related to Ukraine, to the war in Ukraine. One of them is Sandworm, has been very active. For the people who don't know Sandworm, Sandworm is the group that was behind the attacks on the energy sector, on the electric grid in Ukraine, in Kiev, in 2015 and 2016. But this, when was it, 8th of April, the ESET people, so security company, they actually discovered a new Indestroyer malware, which they call Indestroyer 2, and that was also attributed to Sandworm. It was very, very similar to what we saw, or to what was seen in 2016 in the attack there. So that's why they also attributed to Sandworm. And it was planted there to be executed at a certain time in April. But luckily, this attack was prevented, so there was no damage done. But still, you see that they are very, very active. APT 28 and 29 are specifically very active on espionage, as they have always been, but they seem to do specific spear warning attacks against governments, against certain organizations, NGOs, and anything that is of Russian interest, especially if it has to do anything with the war and the conflict in Ukraine. For Turla, we haven't seen much with them yet. There is not so much activity as far as we know, but maybe we're missing something, right? So definitely keep your eyes out for this one. It has been an old and very active group in the past, so definitely keep track of this. Then Def0586 is a group that was created by Microsoft for one of the wipers called Whispergate that was deployed in January. We have Gamaredon, which is attacking Ukraine all over the place, so they are really, really active. Some say they are also related to the intelligence services, to one of the intelligence services of the Russian government. But as far as I see, attribution is not entirely clear yet. Will it ever be? But do know that Gamaredon is a very persistent and advanced group. The next one is a special one where Ghost Rider, or otherwise known by Mandiant UNC 1151, is a group that apparently is located in Belarus, or seems to be state-sponsored by the Belarusian government, and they are responsible for most of the Russian misinformation and disinformation campaigns that are going on since, what was it, October, November, that they really started with this, and that they were very active with their misinformation campaigns to spread, lies, to spread other things about what's happening in Ukraine, about things in the world, stuff that might confuse people, stuff that might be dangerous if people really believe it. So beware of this. I know a bunch of people that are on a daily basis constantly trying to verify information that is spread throughout the world. But do realize that Ghost Rider, which is aligned with Russia, is not the only one, right? Ukraine does things too. I'm not saying that the state of Ukraine does things, but we've seen a lot of information campaigns coming from the Ukrainian direction, also towards the world, mostly to ask for sympathy, right, from the Western countries. So be aware of that. Thank you, Eric, for also sharing the report on In Destroyer 2 for the public. And then we have the guys at Ukrainian CERT, which are, by the way, doing a great job. They created a couple of activity groups called UAC 0035 and 0088. There's some others that are also active, or that they also just created. I didn't include them all, but if you want to have a look, definitely look at the site of CERT-UA, so the CERT of Ukraine. If you use Google Translate or something like DeepL, you will be able to read everything if you cannot understand Ukrainian. But it is really interesting on the IOCs and the TTPs, the tactics, techniques, and procedures that they are actually sharing with the entire world of attacks that they have observed in Ukraine. So if you're interested, definitely follow them. It's really interesting on what they are sharing. Then we have TA416. Now, TA416 is another group, seems to be Chinese related, but not sure at the moment. But they are sending spear phishing attacks, or at least executing spear phishing attacks against European diplomatic entities and migrant services. They are using very specific tracking pixels in emails to kind of identify possible targets. So first, they send emails all around with those tracking pixels to then get some information about that victim, about that person, and then see, is this an interesting diplomat? Is this an interesting person to target for future spear phishing attacks? So it seems like they're trying to do some information gathering on possible victims for the future. And then it already was seen that they also used spear phishing as a follow-up attack to exploit users with multiple things. Sometimes they give a zip file which is infected with some infected malware in there. Sometimes they give PDF files which are executing something, or web bugs on websites. Then we have SMP2Go, is a library that is used to impersonate a diplomatic organization, and also Dropbox is used to deliver plugx malware. So if you think that you can just whitelist Dropbox, you are wrong. Definitely have a look at these things. Malware is spread a lot of the times with things like Dropbox, Google Drive, Microsoft's OneDrive, and so on and so on. They will use whatever they have to get it onto your system. So sandboxing is never a bad idea. Blue North linked to North Korea, which of course has some links to Lazarus Group, as does everything with North Korea. But they are targeting small and medium businesses to steal cryptocurrency specifically. So if you are a small, medium business and you have a cryptocurrency wallet, doesn't really matter how big it is, but maybe it's just an investment, be aware that you might be targeted by Blue North as they are trying to steal your wallet, as they are trying to steal your money. And the last one is Muddy Water. Now, Muddy Water is an Iranian APT, and they are targeting European organization for espionage. They are doing this not to get information on the European level, not to get information on the European organization, but apparently it's because they want to know more about anyone that is an opponent for the regime. So if you say something bad, especially if you are Iranian and you're, for example, in Europe or somewhere else, the Muddy Water APT will try to target an organization to find information on you. All right. So be aware of that. They also like to surveil anti-regime activists that are in the country or outside. So they seem to be really, really active on this part. Now we go to some key exploited vulnerabilities. Now, first of all, if you are following us, if you are following the cert.be website that you can see over here on the right bottom, please go to cert.be advisories, and there you will find a bunch of advisories. Now, how do we look at advisories? We will normally only publish an advisory if we see a threat to Belgium. I mean, every day there are like 50, 60, sometimes 100 new vulnerabilities that are coming out. We're trying to evaluate them and trying to see on certain parameters, like, is it being exploited? Is somebody trying to find an exploit or buy an exploit on the dark web? Are people exchanging information about it? How interesting is it on the underground for criminals? Is it being used by an advanced persistent threat? Is it being used by a ransomware actor? And so on and so on and so on. And we're trying to get this information together to then decide, do we publish an advisory on this? And if we see something that is critical enough, right, to make sure that people should really investigate this or patch this or mitigate it at least, we will publish an advisory. So if you follow us, you should normally, I hope, patch anything that we publish on because we already looked into it and it is pretty dangerous. All right. Now, CISA also does a lot of great work. For example, they gave a list of exploited vulnerabilities, things that have a patch available, but that are still being exploited by Russian state-sponsored threats, especially now with the Ukrainian war, of course. But there are things in there that are coming from 2019, 2018, 2020 that are still being exploited. So if you have your infrastructure, please scan your infrastructure, make sure that you know who you are, make sure that you know what you have, and patch anything there. I sometimes hear people talking about this and saying, it's inside, it's internally in my environment. What do I care? Well, once they are inside with a phishing email, they can use that to go to your domain controller and do whatever. So even internally, these things are important to patch. All right. Log4Shell, I guess everybody knows about this. It was last year, but we still see attacks where Log4Shell is used on systems, for example, with SolarWinds products, Zyxel products, VMware Horizon. These are just a couple of examples of big products that are being targeted by big criminal groups. The Adobe CVE 2022-24086, which is a vulnerability in the Commerce and Magento products of Adobe, is also being exploited at the moment. Then we have a vulnerability in Trend Micro Apex Central, and also a bigger vulnerability in the WSO2 API software. So WSO2 is a piece of software, is a company that tries to make APIs available. It's an open source thing, but there's a company behind it, or at least an organization behind it, and it was identified that there's a big vulnerability in there that can cause a lot of trouble. So if you're using WSO2, make sure that you update all of your software. Now, there are a couple of things that we deem important, but that are not yet actively exploited as far as we know. For example, a vulnerability in HP printers, a vulnerability in Apache HTTP server, one in GitLab. If you're using GitLab internally, good to fix it. Then we have the NetAttack protocol, an open source protocol that was created as an alternative for the Mac OS X, so Apple protocols, to do some communication. And these things are in many cases enabled by default on QNAP and Synology NAS devices, and might be targeted in the future. Then we also have the psychic signatures. This is actually an encryption issue, an issue in the way that it checks for certain parameters in your encryption. So the psychic signatures vulnerability in the Java libraries are also an important thing to check out and to patch. All right. Now, how can we prioritize vulnerabilities? We already looked into that, so we have some information on this. Know your environment, scan internally, also scan externally, do your patch management, know who you are, prioritize because you cannot do everything, especially if you're going through like a change management procedure where you need to do it in tests and then in a pre-production environment and a production environment. This takes time, so you have to prioritize and maybe look at different operating procedures for each of the critical priorities or each of the critical patches. You can definitely use the Common Vulnerability Scoring System, version 3.1. Now, what is interesting in this one, that it also calculates the exploitability, it calculates the impact, and so on. There is, of course, in many cases, a public score created by NVD or by MITRE, but it's good to actually do the same scoring, to try and do the same scoring for your internal systems. It might be that the impact for something is publicly seen as very high and that it gets a big score, but that in your environment, it is so enclosed in so many different or behind so many different firewalls and so on, or it's protecting a system that doesn't have any impact to your company, that you might lower the priority for that. So looking at the public score, very interesting, but do try, if you have the resources, do try to fill in the scoring system with your own information. All right. Now, what do we see for the future, or what do we kind of think will happen in the next quarter, which we are already in? Ransomware threats have decreased, but as long as the Ukrainian war is ongoing and criminals are focusing on Ukraine, we might see that decrease, staying there. But once that goes over, once they say, oh, we don't have to do anything anymore there, they probably will come back and attack our companies again. So be aware of ransomware. Try to make sure that you have your 322 backup plan. Make sure that you have everything backed up multiple times, that you have everything offsite in an offline storage if necessary. Make sure that your users are aware of phishing attacks, that they are aware of strange things happening in your company, that they do report anything, like, for example, with Lapsus, anyone trying to get access to your systems, even if they are trying to pay money to your people, let them know that they can just tell it to you, that there will be no repercussions for these things. It's good that you just be open to your people and make them aware that they can tell everything to the security team. Double extortion techniques, we'll keep on seeing this. Before, we only saw data leaks mostly, but in the last year and a half, we have seen them going to DDoSes. So using DDoSes, if you don't pay, using kind of a name and shame kind of tactic, where you say, you've been targeted, you've been breached, and they just publish a bunch about it. Also, sometimes they say, well, if you don't, we will make sure that your stock goes down. Your public value of the company will go down. How exactly they do it, I'm not a financial guy. Ask it to a financial expert. But those are the tactics that they're trying to use. Ransomware as a service is still increasing. If one goes down, we see another one popping up very fast. So be aware that ransomware as a service is there, and that all of these affiliates, all of these hackers can actually use multiple services depending on who they want to target, depending on how they want to get into your infrastructure and deploy the ransomware. Sometimes it's more interesting for an attacker to use Conti. Sometimes it's more interesting to use Lockbit 2.0, depending on your infrastructure. So be aware that if you have a Conti infection or whatever, it might not be the Conti group behind it, as they are just delivering the service, but it's probably an affiliate or one of those teams, as we have seen in the leaks. There might also be some restructuring of criminal organizations, as we see a lot of doxing for criminal organizations. It all started with Conti, but there is some information being leaked on other criminal groups too. So in the underground, you might see some changes then. Espionage campaigns. As I said before, we have seen multiple espionage campaigns from Russia, China, North Korea, Iran. This is sometimes related to the war. This is sometimes related to economic sanctions. For example, the refugees from Ukraine, but also financial gain for cryptocurrency, any research or any R&D on renewable energy, and anything that is interesting to China. As always, look at the Chinese 14th five-year plan. It is an interesting document to look at and to see if your sector or your particular research that you're doing in your company could be something that they want to have, could be something that they're interested in. More research means more disclosed vulnerabilities. So get ready to patch. We always have Patch Tuesday of Microsoft, but many more companies are doing a regular patch system or patch release system. Then phishing keeps following the latest news and trends. That's always the case. We saw it during COVID. They constantly followed the news and just adjusted what they were doing. Now we see a lot of phishing attacks related to Ukraine, stuff like that. So they keep on following the latest news. And criminals get more service-oriented. It might be that they are just doing initial access, that they are just creating phishing campaigns, and they are actually selling these services to one another on the underground. One extra thing I want to mention, as always, make sure that you're ready. Make sure that you planned everything. I mean, the most important thing is that you plan for whatever kind of attack can happen, and that you have crisis communication ready in case of a breach, in case of a compromise. Not only to say it to your customers, not only to say it to the GDPR, all the organizations related to GDPR, for example, if you're dealing with a data breach, but make sure that you can also communicate with journalists, that you can communicate with external people. If you are Belgian, you can always ask help to the CCB to go into this, but it's always a good idea to hire a professional crisis communication expert to get ready for this. Any questions? And a happy May the 4th for you, for everyone.
Thank you, Kevin. Yeah, there are quite some interesting questions, and the questions. I suggest that we go through them together and pick out a few of them. Let me start with a few questions from Mark Val. Mark Val asks us if we have any info about DDoS threats. We can say that DDoS attacks are still considered as one of the main threats at the moment. Belgium has made the assessment since the beginning of the conflict in Ukraine, has always said that DDoS was the main problem at that very moment. But we don't know how they will evolve. But we have observed worldwide a few DDoS incidents that were incredibly strong. Even I think it was Cloudflare that has observed a DDoS attack never seen before. So DDoS is certainly one of the threats that is very active at the moment. And then the second question from Mark, he says that I noticed also a trend in which unknown hacking groups claim to have obtained data of famous companies but do not provide any evidence, only ask bitcoins for data dumps. Annoying, since companies need to defend against fake hacking news. Do you track these fake hacker groups? Well, we do monitor the dark web. So if any information is published on the dark web about a Belgian organization, probably we will see it. So in that case, we will always notify the involved organizations. Sometimes the organizations don't even know that they were breached. So yeah, we do try to monitor as much as possible. But it's, of course, very difficult to monitor groups who just launch extortion campaigns. They do not steal anything, they do not hack, and they do not publish anything. So to monitor those guys is not so easy, because they stay in the shadows and they don't publish anything. So that's for us, of course, not possible to track those guys.
Yep.
Kevin, I see that you have also something to add.
Yes. On this question from Mark, interesting question. I would say if you have anything that you see online or you are being threatened by one of these groups, let us know and we'll try to help you to try and find out if this is a fake group or not. So you can always let us know on our incident report email address, cert.cert.be, to give us this information, and we will try to give you an answer. All right.
Okay, we also got a few questions regarding the advisories that we publish. A few people asked if they can be notified about the advisories when they are published.
Mm-hmm.
we can say at the moment we do publish them on cert.be, the cert.be website, but we have no real notification system except the RSS feed where you can subscribe. And I saw that Peter Heelen has posted the link
I just
in
posted
the channel
here online.
But the good news is that we are working on an email system that we hope to have up and running soon, and there people will be able to subscribe and to receive notifications by email. Those notifications are already in place for our constituents, the companies that we protect. Those organizations can already receive notifications by email. For the rest, we hope to have that new system in place. Kevin, do you have another question that you have picked out?
Let me check. There's a question here from Luke. Up to now, most cyber attacks targeting firewalls came from China. Since a couple of days, the majority comes from the Russian Federation. Other organizations experiencing the same. Well, that's interesting information, Luke. I didn't know that. I see that these attacks for firewalls seem to come from both criminal groups as in ransomware groups, and also different advanced persistent threats that are state-sponsored, not only from China, but also from others. If you have more information to share, you can definitely either send us a question or the information on ews@cert.be or put it here in the chat.
Okay, and then a question from a man with an incredible desk view, Mr. Andy de Petter. The question from Andy is, what is the source that Citrus is using for the monitoring of Belgian companies? Is it limited to size or type? And what contact details are being used to send out spear warnings? What is the source that Citrus is using?
We are using many sources.
Yeah, we have a complete portfolio of CTI feeds. We have feeds that are focusing on state-sponsored actors. We have CTI feeds focusing on criminal stuff. We have cyber risk assessment tools. We have dark web monitoring tools. We have quite some tools where we collect our data and process it to actionable intel. The size, of course, we are monitoring all the organizations that are considered as NIS organizations, who are on the NIS list, and also, of course, the Belgian government. And what contact details are being used to send out spear warning? We do collect information from our constituents, all contact details, the people names of people who are responsible, physical addresses, whatever, everything that can be important. We also collect IP ranges, domain names, any other stuff that can be useful to do cyber research on. And we use those contact details to send out our spear warnings to our constituents. And in case of, for example, if we have a vulnerability that if we have a new vulnerability, we try to find the systems in Belgium who are vulnerable, and then try to we have a box of tricks how we can try to identify the organizations behind the IPs, and if we can find the contact details of that organization that is vulnerable, we will certainly send them a spear warning. Last year we have sent out a couple of thousands of spear warnings, certainly in the exchange cases, the 3 vulnerabilities about exchange. So in one way or another, we always try to find the organizations who are vulnerable, try to identify them, and send them a spear warning. That's briefly how it works.
And maybe good to know, if we cannot find any contact details of your company, but we can find a domain, we will send an email to info@ of your domain. So please take care of that inbox. Let your secretary know, or secretaries or whatever. Let them know that important emails from CCB should definitely be sent to the security or IT team. And in the future, we will normally have an app an application called Save on Web for Business, where Belgian companies can actually subscribe and give in details that we can use to monitor them all. So I hope that answers your question.
Okay, Kevin, I think that we are reaching
It's 2:20.
the,
So
the end of
thank you
your
there.
presentation. It's 20 past 2, that's correct. The questions that couldn't be answered live will be answered in the question box. We are now ready for a short break. I think we have foreseen 10 minutes. And that means that we will restart at 2:30 with the first guest speaker after the break, Bart Asnot, who will talk about vulnerabilities, their place in the cybersecurity landscape, and Microsoft's approach. So time for a cup of coffee or something else, and we see you all back in 10 minutes at 2:30. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, welcome back for the second part of this CCB event. Next on the agenda is Mr. Bart Asnot. He's the CSA CE Manager Security at Microsoft. And Bart, what are you bringing for us today?
Pedro, first of all, thank you very much that I can be participating in this great event. I will be having the honor to talk to you today about a couple of things that we see in the threat landscape today as within Microsoft and moving from malware into vulnerabilities and what we are doing for the last amount of years with Microsoft to, as much as possible, reduce incoming and outgoing vulnerabilities and how to update that cycle.
Sounds great. The stage is yours, my friend.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Let me start sharing my screen. Let's see. And let me know if it works. If it doesn't work, please, of course, the same. You should be seeing my presentation right now. So, again, thank you for having me. Bart Asnot, working within Microsoft, very active in the cybersecurity landscape, not just only within Microsoft. So today I have the esteemed honor to talk about vulnerabilities, what we see as their place in the cybersecurity landscape, and how we work to mitigate vulnerabilities and to upscale the cybersecurity posture. So before we move into all the interesting stuff that are vulnerabilities and the processes, technologies, and activities that we within Microsoft are doing, let's first have a little bit of an overview of what we from out of Microsoft see today. Now, first of all, as we all know, we are all very active in cyber. The world has been changing. The type of cyber actors have been changing also, of course, with us, and moving even into having the capability of buying a lot of stuff on a lot of different forward dark webs and other locations to actually elevate cyber attacks. A couple of examples that we have seen by some inventories that we have done throughout the last years is, of course, not just attackers for hire, which is actually increasing a lot, especially this calendar year. There's a surge of that type of persons that are really for hire, but of course also DDoS type of attacks, username and password pairs that are stolen and being sold a lot. These are a couple of things I wanted to highlight in this session, next to, of course, vulnerabilities and malware. There's a lot of interesting stuff that is moving intensively. Now, of course, when we talk about cyber actors, extortion, ransomware, as my dear peer Kevin also mentioned, we have seen a couple of very active groups and type of activities going on. What we also have seen within Microsoft is that a lot of various groups and communities on the other side of the table are also working more intensively together. When there's a geopolitical activity going on or something else, we also see a rise and a surge of these communities coming together and working together as one to elevate their type of malicious attacks. Just like we are doing on the blue side, have to work together within the industry to also combat that type of stuff. Now, when we look at the sample of what we are seeing today, is that first of all, every time we within Microsoft are finding a specific activity or an actor, we always name it according to the tabel of Mendeleev, Nobelium, Thallium, Phosphorus, just name it. So we also have seen in July in 2020 up till June 2021, a couple of nation-state activity groups that were very active, moving up the ranks, and also being more focused on targeting sectors. The government is a very highly targeted sector next to the NGOs, think tanks. Of course, that does not mean that other type of sectors like financial and other ones are not targeted yet. One of the things that we have noticed, of course, is that within government, within health, and the other types of industries is that cybersecurity maturity posture sometimes can be a challenge or has to grow here and there somewhere. And this is not just only that aspect, but of course, the amount of data and the type of data that we are seeing that these type of industries are having is very usable on the dark web to again sell and get money out of it, to create a business model. When you look into the target countries, Belgium is also somewhere in here in the top 10, also specifically because of, for example, we look into Belgium, the type of industries, the type of companies and institutes that we are having physically located in Belgium is also very much in the center of Europe. So a high focus of various nation-state attacks, various type of attacks, and indeed also a search on a lot of different type of activities. Now, before we move into the practicalities of vulnerabilities, I also wanted to highlight that, of course, when we look into the left area of this screen, a couple of things that we have seen of most important malware or most used malware throughout the last year or so is that, for example, a suspicious script being launched, files that was suspicious, path deletions, and everything else. Now, everything that we are seeing in here is not working alone, of course. These types of activities, the type of attributes that we are seeing are most times also when we move into more nation-state attack or more type of the advanced type of attacks, of course, correlated and taken together. And to the right, of course, we see another type of attacks, which we also are seeing, predominantly also, of course, last calendar year, we are ramping up to, again, make the necessary inventories for this calendar year. Browser search results manipulation, not sure if you ever see this happening, is that when there's a specific injection or specific misusage, that we can also, of course, start using a manipulation of the browser search results that also can help cyber actors for specific type of malicious activities. And as we can see below, web shell encounters are indeed, based on our defender signals globally, are indeed also seeing sometimes a surge on that level. Now, of course, why is this so important to mention, specifically moving into vulnerabilities, is that when we see a couple of these type of malwares being executed, a lot of these times malware is really being built when a vulnerability is being detected. And when we have, for example, a specific type of attack happening on endpoints, globally, locally, or regionally, there are a lot of times that these are really specifically built to attack a specific type of vulnerability or a state that could have a vulnerability. Think about, for example, the log4j incident that we have specifically targeted to build specific attributes, build specific types of attacks, focused only on this, and they were actually quite successful end of last year. Now, when we look into that specific type of approach that we have according to vulnerabilities, is that actually I had a couple of thought mindsets that I wanted to share with you all into how we approach vulnerabilities and how we handle to build the necessary tools and processes to upscale the security posture within our solution set to combat these type of vulnerabilities as much as possible. Now, before we move into practicalities, I've taken the liberty to open the website of the CVE details. Not sure if you noticed, it's a specific type of website that actually you can crawl and search and have a look into all the severities and all the CVEs that are out there publicly known in the world, and you can build some graphs. There's a lot of very interesting information out of this. Now, as you can, of course, you might have gathered, by year per year, the vulnerabilities are, of course, increasing, which is pretty much normal, because especially when we correlate into Microsoft, is that I've done some analysis and I've done some reporting on this, is that, for example, within the CVE details website, when you look into the Microsoft, is that we have within this website 670 products in there. So we have actually a lot of solutions, a lot of applications and technologies that are being built every day, every sprint, every couple of weeks, updated and improved or upscaled. So there's a lot of products that we have that need to be monitored, that need to be analyzed, that need to be taken into account, that if we have something that we have today, how vulnerable is it? How can it be attacked? How can it be broken down or reverse engineered to do some stuff? So, of course, this is not just Microsoft. There are a lot of other products in the world that, of course, all have their own vulnerabilities. That is one of the challenges that everyone has when you start building something, whether it is a technology or something physical, that can have inherent vulnerabilities in it. Now, when we look into the more details of the CVSS according to the CVEs, is that the weighted average CVSS scoring that was there last year was around 6. Now, when we look, for example, into the area of Microsoft, is that we were on an average almost there. I think looking at the CVE details of last year, I believe within Microsoft we had a CVE average score, I believe, of 7.1 somewhere, 7.1. So actually across the board somewhere there. So we are indeed, and of course, based on the amount of technologies and products that we have, of course, we are a part of this story. Hence, why we need to be able as Microsoft to always take the necessary actions and activities to make sure that when we update something, it is taken into account to make it as least vulnerable as possible. The first thing I actually wanted to share with you all is the security development lifecycle from out of Microsoft. And I'll explain a little later the details of this. Now, the SDL, the security development lifecycle, it's not something new. To be very, very quick on the board right now already. When you look, for example, the trustworthy computing mode memo that Bill Gates already written a long time ago is actually the same period of time when we actually released the first version of the SDL. And the SDL in principle is actually something that we felt in the beginning that was very important moving forward, especially with the amount of new technologies and innovations that we also have done within Microsoft. So in other words, the security development lifecycle for us is a security assurance process. It's focused on software development. And as a Microsoft-wide initiative and the mandatory policy since 2004, actually the SDL helped us to play a critical role to embed as much as security and privacy from every software component that we are building. There are a lot of details with regards to the SDL and what type of application changes that we have done. So if you want to have a more detailed conversation on this, let me know afterwards. However, there's a lot of things in there that not just helped us analyzing and inventorying the applications and the solutions that we have, but also integrating new types of technologies, new types of coding principles that are now mandatory and have changed also our development of our technologies internally as a best practice and as a mandatory case. And without going into details, we also, when we build applications and technologies, we also try to make a best practice and make a mandatory choice that if you want to build an application from out of Microsoft, you need to use a specific type of programming language, code language, by default, always. If you actually don't want or don't have the capabilities to use that one, thanks to the SDL and the entire process that we have built, you really have to very quickly move into a very high chain of command into requesting an exception or something else. So it's not just that we build a technology to run software to a selective tooling and automation type of thing, and to make sure that we find them as much as possible that we can then remediate with updates and everything else. But actually, there's a lot more going on with the SDL than just technology. It's a complete process and mindset that is being integrated into every one of Microsoft that has to adhere to this mandatory policy. As an example, and we, for example, also use within the SDL a specific threat modeling tool. That is then, and it's also, that one is fully available online and publicly also if you want, which is also according to the best practices. We use that one throughout the board, as an example. So the SDL, in short, something that has been there for a while and is constantly also being innovated and changed where possible and where necessary. So when someone asks me, hey Bart, what's the SDL? What's the life cycle and the agility or the new type of versions that we have built into the SDL and the continuous releases type of thing? Why? So for me, it always runs down to two things. We protect Microsoft customers by A, reducing the number of vulnerabilities as much as possible, and B, reducing the severity of these vulnerabilities, which is a very important fact. It's not just reducing the amount of vulnerabilities when you ship a new type of software or product of technology. It's also very important that the severity, the CVSS scoring, goes down as much as possible. Because as we all know in cybersecurity, the higher the severity of a vulnerability, the more critical the impact will be if it's being misused or be able to misuse. So let's talk the vulnerability discovery funnel. Again, as we can see in here, there's a lot of various aspects in the discovery funnel that we have. So let me give a couple of pointers in here and highlight some things. First of all, the vulnerability discovery funnel within the SDL of Microsoft it does not start at the screen that we can see in here. It actually starts a lot more into the left part next to static analysis. The SDL vulnerability discovery funnel starts with the training of the people. It's not just the technology, as I've mentioned. The people, everyone that writes code, that builds the technology or something else, before it is moved into, as we can see in here, moving from static analysis into the red team type of analysis, we also have a huge amount of training and people aspects moving into this with regards to policies, training, coding, everything else. And from the moment it starts to be moved into the technology, as you can see also on the bottom, into the left, it's the easiest to find. We need to use static analysis, for example, for the most part of the vulnerabilities to be detected as much as possible, at the bulk. Also important to note is that we are using CodeQL. Not sure if you know about CodeQL. If you want, happy to have a discussion on this or provide some links. So CodeQL is an open source type of technology that we also use to really run the SDL throughout as much as possible through that type of technology, and to really code and query based on that data lake of everything that we have found into the vulnerability discovery funnel. For the people that had some interesting communications last year, for example, on the Solorigate activity, we also have a security block that we have written, completely using the CodeQL and even providing the queries. So when customers had challenges with Solorigate, for example, we provide just the queries in CodeQL, so you can also do your due diligence just as we have done, to give a practical example. Now, what is of course important when we move into all these types of bulky type of analysis and the static analysis that we are doing in here without going into the details. And it is, think about this one. This is not a shift left actually type of principle. It is more a principle of pulling it through all the various stages where necessary possible, but also where applicable. So from the moment we have done first stage, it's applicable for the second phase and moving on. The amount of type of vulnerabilities or bugs or something else is of course reducing a lot. However, the complexity of these types of bugs and vulnerabilities is going up high. That's why, for example, when we move into the far right of this, after the pen testing, the automation of finding all these types of vulnerabilities and bugging things, we, when applicable, also moving to the human aspect before we ship a product. So as mentioned, on a high note, we are next to the people, the process, and the type of policies that we need to adhere to. There's a lot of phases to detect a lot of various vulnerabilities and blocks. Now, allow me to run you through, for example, another aspect that I also wanted to highlight, which is, for example, Windows. Windows is one of the most used operating systems that we have globally. We also have done tremendous activities, certainly, especially when for example, we look into the advancements in Windows 10 and especially Windows 11, the needs and the qualifications to just have a capability to upskill or update your endpoint to Windows 11. We have moved a lot of more security dependencies before people can start using, for example, Windows 11. I'll explain later. Now, when we are actually building the assessments and the activities to verify Windows and its vulnerabilities to make sure that we ship the right updates where and when necessary and applicable, we actually do a lot of activities before actually release a patch. So, for example, we have specific teams. We also, for example, in Microsoft, we have our own red teams and everything else. But we first start with external data sources. We start looking, of course, within the Microsoft security telemetry, what's out there that we can see. And then, of course, we work with the intelligence partnerships and, of course, with open source, social media, and our MSRC reports to look into the various exploits type of things in there. Now, as mentioned, we also have our red teams that just try to break Windows. Try to take it apart, try to see where any vulnerabilities or bugs could be that could be misused. And then all that type of data, all these activities are moved into what we call, and I love the name, by the way, it's a multi-dimensional exploit analysis process. Now, the analysis process actually, for example, within that process, it looks for the root cause. And the root cause, for example, what is the flaw that is being exploited and how much did we see it used, for example? And looking at our or external telemetry, is there a specific root cause that we have seen that is used a lot? When we talk, for example, about exploit techniques like heap spray or that other interesting stuff, is that we also, of course, look how frequently are specific type of exploit techniques being used against what components. To make sure we also take into account that when we're looking specific exploit techniques are out there in the world, we can, of course, afterwards also map them. Do we have the necessary protection technologies built in, for example, in Windows 10 or Windows 11? Do you have any per default protection capabilities that we can map into this? Moving forward, of course, into the attack surface and looking at the component itself, the potential source of development, to make sure if it's in there, do we have it? And which, of course, is necessary with the mitigation impact. How well do we have something right now that is protecting against this type of attack? And how well is it working? Now, all that data, all these findings are then moved into a specific data lake, data store. And because of that, all that type of data that we have, then we can start defining, based on the mitigation insights, when do we want to patch? What do we need to patch? What is necessary first? Then the triaging comes into place. So there's a lot of stuff actually happening today that allows us to build the necessary patches and hot fixes and understanding how to build something like this. Now, as everything that we can see, of course, in here, there's a lot of stuff that is happening either in parallel, either semi-automated, but also, of course, a lot of manual work into this. And at the end, it comes down to a patch or an update for you all. By the way, if there's one thing that you can, that I also hope that you remember after this session, please patch. We are doing a lot of work and investments to make sure that we all are as secure as possible, so please patch. Now, all the activities that we are doing, actually, when you look at the other end, there are two slides that I want to show you. We have done, of course, every year we do this. We have done an analysis of the amount of CVEs by patch year. And of course, as we can see in here, just like with the vulnerabilities, this is actually the other side of the story. We can see the vulnerability, the CVEs by patch year, and they, of course, are rising, which is normal, which is to be expected. Now, what I actually wanted to explain to you right now is that this is the number of the CVEs by when they were exploited. Now, as we can see, and we are not running, of course, the data of 2022 already, but as we can see, is that thanks to also the evolution of the SDLC, of the evolution of our vulnerability testing and everything else, we can also see that we are making it harder for the other type of, for the cyber actors to be very easily exploit something. Not saying, of course, everything is 100% golden. It will never be. From the moment you build something, there could be a bug or vulnerability in there. But as you can see, we also have seen a decline of the vulnerabilities being misused or exploited within 30 days of a security update. We also see a lot of not known to be exploited type of vulnerabilities. So, in other words, the activities that we are doing is principally built to indeed reduce the amount of vulnerabilities and reduce the scoring, as mentioned, to make sure that when something happens, we try to mitigate as much as possible. And another soundbite I really want to highlight on this one too. Think about if you not do something like this. That's why we do this, to make it as secure as possible where, when needed. Now, next to the internal activities that we are doing, we also have, next to industry connections, collaborations, and platforms, and everything else that we work with, we also have a type of collaboration processes in play and support to our customers. Now, let's then, for example, let's focus on governments. Microsoft has what we call a GSP. So it's a government security program that we have across the world. It's being managed from out of Seattle. That's where within the States where the owners are for the program. The GSP is actually built based on 4 principles. On a high note, it is really meant to provide the countries and the government type of cybersecurity centers to have a close connection and collaboration with Microsoft. That's not just based on human level, to have a connection, collaboration, communication aspect. It's also based on technology, that we can share specific type of threat intelligence informations with governments, specific cybersecurity departments, for governments, for countries, so they can also work on their local level to enrich their own data and have the necessary activities where needed and where necessary. There are a couple of other aspects also, of course, in here too. I think it's also all publicly available. So if you want, I can share you the link. If necessary, we can have a chat on this. But this is, for example, one thing that we do based on a process, based on a policy for external wise with governments, to build also not just that trust, but be as transparent as possible to make sure that we, based on the legal notes in this one, can share what we are allowed to share, what we are able to share. Now, I've also just mentioned the technology. I will not go over the entire paid security, of course. What I actually wanted to highlight in this one, when you look, for example, at Windows 11 alone, is that next to, as you can see in the security foundation below, very highlighted the SDL, but also the bug bounty and security assurance in this one. We also have a lot of built-in technology, which is actually also being a dependency starting from Windows 11. For example, to have your the TPM 2.0 chip in there. If you don't have it, it will be a challenge of updating Windows to Windows 11. So we actually also have defined, as much as possible, the minimum viable product that is shipped on protection level for Windows 11 alone, which actually helps us to also upskill the security posture on OSs by default. So in other words, a lot of activities are going on manually, semi-automatically, and fully automatically that are really built to reduce the amount of vulnerabilities, to reduce the amount of type of vulnerabilities on a higher level, and to make sure that we provide as much as possible that security by default based on technology, based on people, and based on the processes. Now, I can talk for days and days, but I was also asked to not do this. So thank you all. If there are any questions, happy to answer them where possible.
Okay, Bart, thank you very much for this interesting presentation and the insights that you have provided us, because I don't think that this presentation has been given much already for a public by Microsoft, so it's good to know what happens in the background. And yes, we have a few interesting questions in the questions channel, and I suggest, Bart, that we go through the questions together.
Sure.
Maybe you can start with the one that just popped up by Joachim Kennedy. Can you see the channel, Bart? Is the question clear for you?
I have the chat open, but I'm a little lagging.
You have to take the question channel. So you have the chat channel, question channel.
Yeah. Okay, so what's the from what? Who was the first question you want to have?
Joachim Kennedy.
Okay. Yes. So apologies. So we are doing the number of exploited decreased. So per year from now, what we are seeing is indeed also a decline in the number of exploited CVEs that we are seeing today. There has been, especially when we talk about the end of last year, for example, and also this year, I don't have the numbers yet, but more historically, yes.
Okay, and then the question from Niels Hofmans is also an interesting one, but
I believe it was there before we worked more intensively together with you.
Okay, then the question from Jens. In his organization, DevOps teams do work in an agile self-steering way. How do you at Microsoft ensure the SDLP is followed by so many self-steering teams?
So it's a very good thing. So this is when you talk about your own organization, we always talk top-down and bottom-up. The SDLC is a top-down principle. No one is allowed to do anything besides the SDLC. That's it. You have to have exec sponsorship. As mentioned, and without going into details, of course, when you, for example, want to build something, you have to use the coding application X. From the moment you want to use something else, you are pretty much immediately have to have approval from a VP. That's it. Top down, if it helps.
Okay, and I think that there is one more question from Peter van Hoetem.
That's a very good question.
Save the best for last, as usual.
So a taxi feed. I have no idea if it will be coming up. It's a frequent question, so I concur on this one. Not sure if I have no response to this right now, and apologies for this.
No problem, Bart. I think that you have answered already quite some questions this afternoon, not only during the question round, but also before with your presentation. I still have one last simple question for you. I'm sure you will be able to answer this one. Will you make your presentation available to the public? In other words, will we be able to publish your presentation on our website?
Yes. I think most part of the presentation can be put on the website. It's also an honor, and thank you again for being able to have a chat with you all.
Thank you very much, Bart, and I'm sure we see each other soon.
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, we are right on track. A few minutes before schedule, but that's fine. We still have one last guest speaker for this afternoon. The last, but certainly not the least guest speaker for today is Tom Hegel from Sentinel-1. Hi, Tom. Welcome again.
Hello. Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Everything is up and running from your side, so that's okay.
Perfect.
Thank you for being here again. The second time that you're bringing the presentation for CCB's public, much appreciated. What's maybe expect from your presentation, Tom?
Yeah, great. Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be here again. Today I'm going to be talking about a lot of what is happening on the threat landscape related to the whole invasion of Ukraine. There's a lot going on, and it's something that changes every day. So I'm going to try and present on current knowledge and hopefully share some interesting insight with everybody here.
Okay, thank you very much. Stage is yours.
Thank you. Thank you. I will. Let's see if I can share the proper screen here. 1 second. Sorry, 1 second, everybody. Okay, can you see my slides? All right. Let's go ahead and perfect.
Yeah.
What's that?
Everything is fine.
Okay, perfect. Sorry about that. Thank you so much, everybody. So let's go ahead and get started. So as mentioned, my name is Tom Hegel. I work with the Sentinel Labs team here at Sentinel-1. My day-to-day is focused on the threat landscape, keeping up with what all the bad guys are doing out there. Obviously, since the invasion of Ukraine has kicked off, it's been so heavily focused on everything going on in that region and Russian threat actors and everything on that side. So hopefully this is some pretty interesting insight for you. Quick agenda. We'll be kind of going through this pretty quickly, but overall, I want you to be able to leave this talk with an understanding of the current threat landscape for who the threat actors are on the Russian side and elsewhere that are heavily involved in the invasion of Ukraine on the cyber front. And I want you to also have like a perspective on the timeline of how things have evolved and maybe what's to come. And I think an important thing to note here is what I'm talking about is purely focused on the cyber side, obviously, especially for the crowd here. However, when you compare it to everything going on the kinetic side, it's very often insignificant. So I'm not trying to downplay anything on the kinetic side, but really show what's happening on the cyber front related to the invasion that can kind of, I think, guide our perspective to what cyber war or hybrid warfare really looks like. It's something that's been so heavily debated since the invasion began. Is everything we're seeing has really questioned what we expected a war to involve on the cyber front. So hopefully you get some new perspective on this, but that's overall what we're going to be walking through. So starting off, talk about a quick overview of the threat actors and the malware families that we're seeing primarily dominating the invasion on the cyber front. So there's quite a lot here, so you don't need to memorize any of this, but I want you to take a few things away. First is there's a lot of new actors popping out that we don't really have long histories of that group in particular. But as you'll note here, such as with Sandworm, if you've been tracking this stuff pretty closely, this map we have here is really changing very, very quickly as time continues, as we continue to see these operators conduct their campaigns. We're starting to cluster things closer and closer. When I gave this talk, what was it, a couple weeks ago, there was, I believe, one less group, and one of these was split into multiple groups. So we're evolving what we know about these threat actors on a daily basis. Sandworm is a really good one to highlight because Sandworm, and we had the alias of Sunflower Seed, UNC 3715, and others that were kind of considered multiple groups at the beginning of this invasion. And I think one thing to really note here is, in my opinion, Sandworm being one of the more, apex threat actors in the industry. They are very successful in their destruction. If you're not familiar with them, definitely check out the book by Andy Greenberg on Sandworm. They're responsible for a lot of the power outages in Ukraine in like 2015, 16, I believe. And the very ICS focused malware campaigns, even like 2 weeks ago when Indestroyer 2 came out, looking at impacting the electrical grid in Ukraine. So fascinating stuff to see from Sandworm. But there are others here as well, like we see Ghostwriter from Belarus. We saw Scarab APT, which is a Chinese threat actor with a long history of interesting campaigns. We saw them going after Ukraine, but there's so much more kind of going on. Another thing to highlight here is the good old classic APT 28 and 29 on the bottom left. In this invasion, what we're seeing are very limited campaigns of them primarily leaning on credential theft phishing campaigns. And if you're familiar with those actors, it's kind of out of place because they have, for a long time, dominated with custom malware, very novel attack techniques, and seeing them kind of participate in such a less significant way compared to somebody like Sandworm is, I think, noteworthy. So this is kind of how we look at it. It's evolving daily at this point. Very interesting nonetheless. So this is a timeline of everything that we've kind of been tracking on the open source intelligence front, primarily open source intelligence. There's a few things in here that aren't public, but I think there's some interesting things to highlight, particularly around the trends of the few weeks that have evolved. So I'm not going to walk through everything in here. There's obviously quite a lot. I'm planning on open sourcing this in the next week or two with a blog post on the Sentinel Labs side. So hopefully it can contribute to some sort of historical preservation of everything that happened, because as you can see from like a threat intelligence perspective, it was extremely overwhelming to keep up with everything that's coming out from vendors and governments and news media and things like that. So to kind of walk through this in some bulk sections, first I have here kind of the activity leading up to and kicking off right when the invasion started. And it's worth noting that there was a lot of stuff way to the left of this, such as the Whispergate campaigns and all the DDoSing and so forth. But to kind of compact it here, we're going to focus on kind of right around the invasion. So I think something to highlight here primarily is that first wiper wave leading into the invasion, which was the Hermetic Wiper campaign. This is one we named, and kudos to our colleagues at ESET and Microsoft for really jumping on this. It was an amazing time, I think, in my opinion, taking out the ignoring the horrible aspect of the war. It was fascinating to see the industry collaborating for a cause that was worthy of the scrutiny, I think. So kudos to those researchers on those teams for their work and collaborating on the Hermetic side. But, in the hours leading up to Putin ordering the invasion, that's kind of how we saw it kick off. Immediately after, we begin to see the second wave of wipers with Isaac Wiper. We see the classic APT-28 kicking off their phishing campaigns, and the Belarusian group known as Ghostwriter kicking off their primarily influence-focused operations, but they are using malware to get in on and do this against media organizations. And that long yellow line, and it's worth noting here, the fading of these lines kind of is supposed to signify we don't know exactly when this ended or began. It's just kind of like a range of potential here. So that long line is the acid rain wiper. We didn't at the time, we didn't know this was happening, and this was even acid rain wiper. But if you haven't kept up with it, acid rain, which I'll talk about more in detail later, was the wiper that we found and blogged about. Gosh, I believe it was like 3 weeks ago at this point. But this is the wiper that impacted the Viasat connection, and you may be familiar with it. It took out about, I believe, I want to say about 3,000 to 5,000 wind turbines in Germany. So there's a lateral impact there, but overall kicked off trying to disrupt satellite service in Ukraine and had spillover into Germany, which is fascinating. That was an IoT modem wiping wiper that we ended up talking about there. And then I'm kind of skipping over some things here, obviously, but the things that happened in the weeks to 2 weeks after this really kind of started to lean heavily into the criminal aspect and the hacktivism side, which was fascinating to see. We see pro-Russian, pro-Ukrainian crimeware organizations starting to make a political stance. One to highlight here, which I'll talk about more in detail in a second, is the Conti organization. They make a pro-Russian statement, and then there begins to be disgruntled insiders or outsiders that are leaking their internal information in opposing those views and so forth. And then we have, so much other stuff like botnet affiliates taking a stance politically. We see the TrickBot organization leaks. One thing I think to highlight here is the Belarusian railway attacks. This is I think in my perspective, one of the more capable hacktivist groups, the Belarusian cyber partisans, that is very successful and overall, I think, highly capable for a hacktivism group. They were able to disrupt the railway service that was coming out of Belarus to support Russia, transporting goods and services and so forth for the invasion. They interrupted that and made a stance with their political statement, which is, I believe, rather noteworthy compared to others you look at, part of like Anonymous, that are kind of doing more script kiddie type things. Moving on, we begin to see more waves of activity, and it's, I think, again, to highlight, we only know what we know at this point. There's so much more that's going to be coming to light in this timeline that we just don't know about yet. However, from our perspective at this point, we begin to see additional waves of wipers. Caddy Wiper, the wiper that's been associated with so many other campaigns delivering secondary payloads, has been making use in this point as well. We see targeting of Ukrnet media organizations by APT-28. This is again where we see the UAC-26, which is the Scarab Chinese APT targeting Ukraine. Not necessarily, in our opinion, a pro-Russian objective, rather than just their own Chinese intelligence collection mission. So everyone in the governments these governments want to, support their own needs, and seeing them go after Ukraine on their own effort is noteworthy. And then, we start to see so many other malware campaigns with graph steal and GRU implants, more intrusions against military and government organizations of Ukraine. And this last section to highlight here, I think, is leaning heavily into transitioning away from, just generic targeting to more disruption again, and more on the kinetic side. So we see bottom left-hand side, the site collapse blink disruption from the Department of Justice here in the US. Very interesting disruption of their botnet, which is fantastic to see. That was the Sandworm botnet that's replaced VPN filter, which is very interesting. And one thing to highlight here in the middle top is the Ukr Telecom ISP disruption. This was an interesting incident here, because it wasn't just like a wiper getting in or somebody getting phished and something being shut off or whatever. In this case, the current news is kind of leaning towards there was an employee in a Russian-controlled region of Ukraine that was physically forced to provide access. So I think that really starts to remind you of the realism of this type of conflict and how it can impact you on the cyber front. It's not all about just avoiding phishing emails. You have to protect your employees and understand that they can become compromised themselves, willfully or not. And there's a lot of other interesting things going on in this section. I kind of ended this timeline at the Caddy Wiper plus In Destroyer 2 attacks on the energy sector in the ICS networks in Ukraine. There's not a lot of information on that one, obviously, at this point. The rumor is, or the current knowledge is, it was identified and detected before it was in use. So I hope we get more insight on that from the US government and others that participated, such as ESET and Microsoft. And so hopefully more to come on that side. And obviously there's so much more continuing on this line, but I think this is kind of a good bulk of what to understand of the initial invasion and kind of how it evolved over time. So if you weren't keeping up with that, we have, as of right now, 6 wipers, potentially one more based off of something Microsoft has mentioned in their recent article that they haven't published yet. But we see a huge shift in pre-invasion to what today we see from all the Russian actors, a huge agenda towards these commodity, replaceable wipers that are just kind of being dumped everywhere. I think Caddy Wiper is the most noteworthy because it's being used along with the secondary payloads that are a little bit more interesting, like In Destroyer 2. And then a part of that, we have 3 Linux wipers. And this was a part of the In Destroyer package that obviously focused heavily on the Linux side of the house. And then elsewhere, we have the modem and router wipers. Acid Rain is the first we know about that impacted Viasat that we found. There's likely more. We don't know at this point, but I think that leans into the probable state of what's to come, is identifying additional ones that are impacted here. I think to highlight, if you weren't keeping up with what we published on the Acid Rain, we got lucky. We were able to find a single sample that somebody uploaded from Italy, potentially somebody that was doing the actual incident response engagement from the impacted organization, uploaded to VirusTotal. We got lucky, found it, and that was one sample that impacted thousands of devices in Germany and Ukraine and potentially elsewhere. So there's likely, take that scenario into relevance of what the scale is, there's likely more of this going on we just don't know about at this point. So one thing to highlight here is the hacktivist and crimeware group agendas. Pro-Russian, like I mentioned, we have a few of these ransomware groups. We've got affiliates with like DanaBot, the crimeware botnet, and then we have Killnet. Killnet was interesting. It was when I first heard of Killnet. They were the hacktivist group that's pro-Russian that was attacking Anonymous because they were pro-Ukrainian. and trying to leak information on them and so forth. More so, we're seeing Killnet now being mentioned in articles and being identified in denial of service attacks against certain organizations in a pro-Russian agenda. So interesting to see them continuing to operate. On the other hand side, we have pro-Ukrainian. Obviously, there's been a lot of the anonymous side, with the public opinion so heavily leaning towards pro-Ukrainian. Anonymous has really kind of shined there. And we have the Belarusian cyber partisans, like I mentioned, doing the railway attacks. And then one other I want to highlight here is the IT Army of Ukraine. And if you're not familiar with it, this is the volunteer organization that I believe was started by the Minister of Digital Transformation of Ukraine started it, and anyone can join voluntarily and be given a list of Russian targets to try and disrupt, primarily denial of service attack focused and so forth. So fascinating shift in the overall threat landscape. I don't believe, to my knowledge, this is one of the first public, open, voluntary recruitment schemes for a cyber group like this. So very cool to see. And then on the mixed and unknown side, we have things like Conti, which is, like I mentioned, they had a pro-Russian stance at the beginning of the invasion, and then somebody, potentially an insider or an outsider, started leaking their information because of that pro-Russian stance. And you're seeing a lot of interesting stuff come out of that, which I'll show in the next few slides. And then we have the mysterious leaks, and there's just so much kind of going on with leaked data coming out of Russian organizations and Ukrainian organizations. It's hard to make sense of if it's accurate, has it been verified. So I think a lot of this is just has to be considered with a heavy grain of salt, because you just don't know if there's ulterior motives around that data being leaked. And we've seen some clues to others trying to persuade or distract with other fake leak data and things like that. So talking about the data coming out of the Conti group, we also see it, part of the TrickBot leaks as well, is are these insiders, are they outsiders that are, attacking these groups and compromising them? And there's, based on the data being leaked out of these groups, a lot of these individuals, operators, we're now getting rare perspective into how these groups operate, and getting clues that they are, actually being heavily supported by others like the Russian government. And you look at the data being leaked, and it's hard to ignore the fact that this is one example here coming out of the TrickBot leaks group. It's hard to ignore how professional that leak looks. In my opinion, if I were to see this leak coming out of Twitter, my first thought would not be this is some hacktivist kid or script kiddie that's just disgruntled and leaking information. In my opinion, this looks like an intelligence operation by somebody that's highly capable and has an overall mission to specifically leak this information for reasons yet to be known. Talking about bank cards and DOBs and Skypes and emails, and just the collection of info here on a single operator is fascinating, and I hope it continues, to be honest with you, because I think we'll see some good coming out of highlighting these individuals. So again, the attacks on the telecom side are very interesting. Like I talked about Ukr-Telecom with the physical forcing of access. Then we have the Viasat with acid rain. There was a lot of information coming out about Starlink when SpaceX deployed Starlink to Ukraine to support their internet needs. Really interesting was seeing how the Starlink team was supporting the ability to respond and avoid the disruption efforts from Russian forces. So fascinating to see this approach evolve of telecommunications to these mobile services such as Starlink. And there's so much more going on the telecom side. I think it's something that you can't quite ignore. And the importance of telecommunication in this war, I think, is critical to the success of Ukraine so far. You look at everything they've been up to. This is the piece that I think is allowing them to continue to spread their message globally. Which steps us into the information warfare side is, in my opinion, Ukraine has far exceeded our expectations in public perception of the war. Never in my life have I seen such amazing propaganda for good. You look at the sunflower, you look at tractors pulling tanks. Never in my life again would I imagine to have seen so many tractors pulling tanks down the road for comedic value. I think it's amazing, and I think they're doing really interesting information campaigns with this propaganda for good aspect that's really impacting the Western front. However, just because on the outside of Ukraine and Russia, we're getting a positive insight into the success of Ukraine and how they're just killing it out there. Inside Russia, there's a shift towards the the balkanization of information and their services with the sanctions and the information being restricted so heavily in Russia. This is why I think we are seeing such a heavy emphasis by Russian citizens on supporting the Russian agenda in this case, because their flow of information, they're not seeing a lot of this Russian propaganda for good, to say the least. So I want to highlight a couple things here that are, in my opinion, kind of some points of confusion that we see since the invasion began. The first is there is a lot of stuff going on the cyber front, completely unrelated to the Ukrainian crisis. I think it's very easy to look at something and be like, that's Russia responding to us supporting Ukraine. That's the only reason that would happen. That's just not always the case. We see all these APTs, all these crime groups continuing to operate with success. They may be making heyday of the focus of the world on Ukraine right now, but I think that's beginning to fade in some aspect. Obviously, there's a lot of claims of hacks with no proof. We see that from a lot of hacktivist groups saying, "Oh, look what I did! I compromised this Russian bank website." A lot of that, I think, you just have to, again, take with a heavy grain of salt, because there's not often a lot of proof that actually happened. And then lastly, there's the idea that a lot of these Russian threat actors just did not prepare. We've been saying this since we began looking to some of those early attacks, and then things that continue to come out today is there's clear indication that a lot of this was prepared in the months to year prior to the invasion. Some of these infrastructure builds, some of the malware being developed, and so forth. And then lately we see others such as Microsoft in their latest report coming out and confirming some of those from their telemetry as well. So what's to come on the threat horizon here? I think it's important to look at this in these three different buckets. It's easy to get so much fear, uncertainty, and doubt on everything that's happening, but when you bucket into these groups, I think it helps ease the tension and give you a better perspective on what's happening. So on the possible side, I'll be the first to say it is definitely possible that there is some malware out there trying to be developed that is trying to do some mass global outage of ICS or critical infrastructure against NATO or pro-Ukrainian countries or anything like that. It's definitely possible. However, it's rather unlikely, I think, at this point. I think if you step more into the probable section, things we'll see are the retaliation to any organization, private business, governments, nations in NATO and elsewhere that are pro-Ukrainian or trying to make an impact against Russia for what they've been doing. I think that includes military, humanitarian, and obviously the political opposition side. The critical infrastructure attacks will likely be focused on economic damage. So we'll see, targeting any critical infrastructure that can make an impact on that front. And I think for perspective, you can look at these Russian actors recently targeting the grain and farming services coming out of Ukraine, because that's Ukraine's main source of income, and their main industry is the grain output. So seeing them attack that for economic impact, I think is highlighting what's to come for them when they start doing the same thing globally at this point in retaliation. And there is likely that we'll see spillover similar to the Viasat incident. Deliberate or not, I think there's a likely chance that there will be spillover if they continue to make use of these wipers and targeting these ICS type things, as we're seeing equipment as we start to see them evolve over time. Technique wise, in the probable section, a lot of these are very capable threat actors. We'll likely see the use of 0 days against public infrastructure, and we'll likely see the use of supply chain attacks that they've successfully used for very high impact throughout the years, such as SolarWinds. And then on the opportunistic side, I think this steps a lot into the value of Russia controlling their information so tightly. We are going to see likely hacktivists inside Russia so heavily focused on a pro-Russian agenda, basically going after anybody that has damaged Russia, so to say, by whatever means possible, such as ransomware or purely destructive stuff, or just leaking data, things like that. So can't ignore the opportunistic side, to say the least. And what's to come of the Russian threat actors as they evolve over time? In our opinion, I think what we're going to start to see is these sanctions impact the overall agendas of Russian APTs. I think it's going to get pretty close to what we see with coming out of North Korea, such as Lazarus here, where they are very financially focused. They are trying to fund their own operations and their own governments in many cases. And if you look at a Russian threat actor compared to North Korean, I think if they both have the same agenda of trying to be financially viable for Russia, we think the Russian APTs are going to be highly successful in this compared to the Lazarus side. So I think it's an interesting shift from really amazing espionage threat actors shifting to a financial focus. That will be a noteworthy shift in the threat landscape out of these Russian threat actors. And that is all I have. Hopefully that makes sense. And I know there's a lot there. I will say that if there's anything about this that you would like to talk more about, definitely let me know. Like I mentioned, the timeline, I'm planning on releasing open source. And so you can get, the references to all those aspects of everything that's been going on over the years. So overall, that's it. Thank you. Thank you guys so much. Okay. Hey, there we go.
Yep, some technical issues, but okay. Tom, thank you very much for bringing us this insights in what is ongoing and what we may expect. And to be honest, I think that we will see some new stuff in the coming weeks and months. But good, I think that a lot of cybersecurity companies and experts are following up the situation, and we try as a CCB to share as much information as possible with the Belgian organizations. I've seen that there was one very interesting question in the questions channel from Eric Oldihet. Can you elaborate on identification of threat actors? How do you know that they are tied to the conflict? Not an easy one.
Yeah, it's honestly, we're leaning very heavily on our telemetry on Ukrainian organizations and things coming out of the Ukrainian government. We see a lot of these threat actors I talked about doing phishing campaigns against Ukrainian government organizations, or actually doing some sort of malware deployment that's unique to Ukraine. So we're leaning very heavily into private data or things that are shared openly through other resources. And like I mentioned, a lot of this on the timeline is very focused on open source intelligence. So it's not just Sentinel-1. We're also seeing amazing research come out of ESET and others that are helping us get perspective into this threat actor that may be attacking Ukraine. And then at that point, once we have kind of like an initial kickoff of what they're doing, we will, do our typical research and dig into it as deeply as we can to confirm, okay, this is something that's unique to Ukraine targeting, rather than just some global campaign of activity. So it overall depends. And I want to give huge kudos to the Ukrainian CERT. They are releasing amazing details that I don't know what they've done since the invasion began, but they have just been crushing it. releasing information, identifying interesting stuff that allows us that we don't have telemetry in some cases to be able to get perspective into some attacks. So yeah, a little mix of everything. Hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, I can confirm that the Ukrainian CERT are doing a magnificent job, and even in these crazy times, they still have time to answer questions from colleagues from other national CCERTs. And yes, they are providing quite some information, and thankfully they are also helped by the public sector and other national CCERTs, so they get quite some help. But at the end, it's up to them to act and to solve the problems. And yes, their information is very helpful. Okay, Tom, that was the only question that we received from our audience. I thank you very much again for helping us out with the insights about the current situation, and maybe one day we can have a drink together here in Belgium. Thank you,
yes, count me in. Thank you, everybody. Have a great one.
So that brings us to the end of this CCB's event, Center for Cybersecurity's Share and Connect, the previously known as the QCTR. We have no date scheduled yet for the next event, but I guarantee you that you will be informed in time about new upcoming webinars from CCB. Thank you very much for being with us. I hope that you have learned a lot from it and that you can use this information to improve your cybersecurity. Take care. Thank you very much. Bye.